Before the release of The Division, graphics was one of the biggest topics around. And now that the game is out, you don't really hear a lot about it anymore. Usually, that's a good thing. It means that people are happy with how it looks, and I couldn't tell you otherwise. I think this game is a true beauty. But does it look as good as that it did back at the E3 presentations that they released a couple of years ago? That is the question that we will answer in today's video. So, let's begin. As most of you know by now, when they first showed off the game, they also released a Snowdrop engine trailer where they highlighted 5 key features that the Snowdrop engine would bring to the table. We had time of day, advanced particle system, procedural destruction, dynamic material shaders, and we also had dynamic global illumination. Ever since I did my first graphics comparison, I've used these 5 key features as a benchmark to see whether the developers delivered on what they promised. At E3 2015, it seemed that some of those features were missing. For example, bullets didn't really damage windows, snow didn't seem to melt, and those kind of things. Then I also redid the test in the beta, where the results seemed to be a little bit better, although not quite like the trailer. But now, the final game is out, and it's time to put it to the test, right? So let's start this comparison off with the first feature, the time of day. Now let's be honest here, I don't think that anyone who has played this game for longer than an hour can really say that this game lacks any time of day. I don't know exactly how long it takes for the game to have a full 24-hour cycle, but if I had to guess, it would be around that time, an hour. You can see the sun moving across the sky, you can see the shadows from the sun move with it, and this is not a baked effect or anything. If you, for example, destroy some objects, you will see the shadow of the pieces as they fall down and see the deformed shape back in the shadows as well. Time of day is, as far as I can tell, definitely in there. Next up, we get to the advanced particle system. It's also pretty difficult to say that this is not in the game, as it's probably one of the most pronounced features. What they mean by the advanced particle system is that things such as snowflakes, the steam, and the fog in the game, and all that kind of stuff are all affected by the lights in the surrounding area. And there's nothing to complain here either, especially when it's nighttime and you're walking around the map, this feature shines. Sometimes you can't even see 10 meters ahead of you because some thick snowstorm that's right in front of you, and combined with the lights that can almost give you a blinding effect. There's no doubt about this feature being in the game either. The next thing on the list is the procedural destruction, and I'm a little bit mixed about this one. I already said this in the beta, but I think that visually the destruction is absolutely amazing. You have all these things that break into different ways, like the wooden chunks of a bench, or the glass of the windows, or maybe the tops of all those brick cover pieces. And there are so many smaller and bigger examples that show off the destruction in its prime. But the problem I have with it is that you can't really utilize the destruction in ways that I would have hoped. Let me explain a bit, because I know that the game is filled with cover and objects that you can actually destroy, that you can just shoot at and create a hole. But there are also a lot of objects in this game that completely lack bullet penetration. I'm guessing that that is the result of the developers making a conscious choice in terms of balance. After all, it's a cover-based game, and if you would be able to mow down every cover piece, that might take the game in the wrong direction. So I'm not even going to complain about it. But the one thing that kind of bothered me is that the collision detection for objects doesn't really ever change based on what you destroyed and what not. I found myself often trying to toss a grenade or a turret through a destroyed window or even through a large hole. Problem is, however, that it simply doesn't work and the grenade will simply bounce off as if the window or whatever cover piece you try to throw it through was never destroyed in the first place. And it also works like this the other way around. There are some objects in this game that do allow you to throw items through, but if that is the case, you would also be able to throw those items through anyway, even if the object isn't destroyed. This kind of takes away a lot of the meaning that the procedural destruction has for me. But at the end of the day, this is a video about the graphics and the graphics alone, and visually the destruction is exactly what they promised it would be, so I can't really stripe this one off. Next one on the list are the dynamic material shaders. This is where some big changes have been made from how it looked like back in the trailers to what it is right now. With the dynamic material shaders, they mean that when it has been snowing or when the sun has been shining all day, that the snow on the ground and on the objects around it will build up and then melt again depending on the environment. In the E3 2014 trailer, they even pushed this a little bit further by showing off gameplay segments where the heat of, for example, the flamethrower would also play a factor in the melting snow and stuff like that. For example, you can see here that the flamethrower turret melts away the snow that is on the car, and you can see that the seeker mine melts away the snow that is under the elite enemy after the explosion. And that's just something that I cannot find back in the current version of the game. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to say that the material shaders have been completely removed, because there are still some areas in this game where, you have the melting snow effect. The only difference from the trailers is that it's very minimal. On top of that, heat also doesn't affect the snow entirely. I tried a lot of things, like throwing maybe a couple of fire grenades or normal grenades, and even getting some of the cleaners to burn me down so it would maybe, melt the snow underneath me or the snow on the car behind me. But it seemed that the snow on top of the cars and stuff like that, it all remained unaffected. Thing is, however, that the developers still have some clever scripting to make it seem like that the snow actually melts. For example, when you toss a grenade next to a vehicle, all the snow on that vehicle will be removed upon explosion. But this is not really dynamic, it's simply if X happens, then Y is applied. It's kinda weird when you throw a grenade behind a car and suddenly the front of the car is completely void of any snow. And all of this really isn't the same as what they showed in previous trailers. And then we get to the last one, the dynamic global illumination. Luckily, I can assure you that global illumination is definitely in this game. It might be a little bit difficult to show you as it is not as pronounced as any of the other effects, but looking at some of these time lapses, you will see how the light on the left wall bounces the light to the right wall. You can even see some of those light spots on the brick wall sometimes as, the environment gets brighter. Objects in every area seem to shift color based on the light around it, and it looks really good. However, it isn't perfect. One of the reasons that I had so much trouble with finding and actually seeing the global illumination in the past is because I was looking for something that simply wasn't there. This game uses a set of radiance transfer probes to fake the effect of global illumination. And the dynamic in the title simply means that it can react to active light sources that can be turned on and off. That being said though, there are still areas in this game, like for example on the construction site here, where if you shoot out the light and then let it turn itself back on, some of the objects change color that really shouldn't change color. Initially this made me think of that, that combination of a spot and a point light, but I guess my only explanation for this is that it is just a limitation of the engine itself. From the very first moment that they talked about their game engine, it was always going to be global illumination with those radiance transfer probes. It was never going to be ray traced. Man, we're actually years and years away from having real global illumination in games. So if you had to ask me, yes, this game did hold up to that promise. It did deliver. This game is probably the most beautiful game that I have ever played, and I'm sure it's also safe to say that it uses a lot of new and advanced technology. But even if we put aside the dynamic material shaders, I still do not believe that it looks as good as what they showed back in the trailers. Because, you see, besides the things that they showed off and advertised their game with, there are also a lot of other things, like the reflections, that are simply just not as good in the final game. From my testing, the game uses some sort of dynamic cube map in combination with screen space reflections to emulate reflections. This can very easily be seen by running from one end to the street to another and then quickly looking in a big glass window. If you do this fast enough, you will notice that the dynamic cube map hasn't really updated yet and that the reflections don't really match. But stare at the window long enough and you will see that it updates right in front of your eyes. In addition to that, it's also very obvious that the game uses screen space reflections on top of the cube map, I guess to kinda hide it a little. Because yes, if you look into the water puddles, you will see that the objects are being reflected. But what happens when you look down far enough so that the object that is being reflected is in itself not on the screen anymore? Well, the reflections also disappear, which is exactly the big flaw that comes with those screen space reflections. Both of these things were really not the case in the initial trailers. You could definitely see all of the objects sharply being reflected even when they're not on the screen themselves. And that pretty much goes for a lot of other things as well. In conclusion, to answer the questions once and for all, does the game have global illumination? Yes, it does. Did they held up to a lot of the promises that they made? Yes, they did. Does it look as good as they did back in 2013? No, it doesn't. I would say that it gets pretty close, but they definitely had to get rid of some of the effects and replace them with some less complicated ones. And that was pretty much all for today. As always, I really hope you enjoyed, and I will see you guys later, or like they say, in the Netherlands. Zie je later!